Let's jump right in. Picture the Munich skyline at twilight. You've got this sleek, modern glass office building standing tall, practically a beacon of European tech innovation. This was the headquarters of Wirecard. People were actually calling them the PayPal of Europe. This was a German tech giant promising to absolutely revolutionize how the entire world moved money. And honestly, it wasn't just successful, it was hailed as the undisputed crown jewel of the European tech industry. But as we're going to see in today's explainer, that gleaming facade, it was literally a digital ghost. The whole Wirecard saga is just an absolute masterclass in corporate gaslighting, where the truth was hiding in plain sight the entire time.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of this solution, we have to look at this number. 24 billion euros. That is billion with a B. At its absolute peak, that was Wirecard's staggering valuation. To put that into perspective, it was actually worth more than Deutsche Bank, a legendary, historic banking institution. Wirecard had become a massive pillar of the prestigious German DAX index. For the establishment over there, it had achieved that sort of mythical status, right? The idea that it was simply too big and way too successful to ever fail. Investors were just completely mesmerized by its astronomical growth.
But here is where the heartbeat monitor just completely flatlines. 1.9 billion euros. Wirecard had loudly, proudly claimed that this massive pile of cash was sitting safely in highly secure bank accounts, completely liquid, ready to go. The shocking, almost unbelievable reality? It simply did not exist. No way. Nearly 2 billion euros of corporate wealth just evaporated into thin air because it was never there to begin with. So you've got to ask yourself, how on earth does a deception this bold, spanning multiple continents, actually happen?
Section 1. The Black Box Business.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand how this whole mirage was built, we've got to look at its origins under their intensely driven CEO, Markus Braun. He was this Austrian computer scientist turned consultant who actually famously loved wearing these sharp black turtlenecks. Back in 2002, he transformed the struggling firm by finding a highly profitable, highly specific niche. They started processing payments for online gambling and pornography. These were massive, cash-heavy industries that the traditional big banks absolutely refused to touch because of the reputational risks. It was very high risk, high reward, but more importantly, operating in these slightly taboo gray area sectors provided the absolute perfect cover for a company that fundamentally preferred to operate in the shadows, far away from traditional scrutiny.
So as they pursued this crazy global expansion, they didn't just buy up existing infrastructure, they built a labyrinth. They relied heavily on what are called third-party acquirers. Now, this is a mysterious local partner, supposedly processing transactions for Wirecard in countries where Wirecard didn't actually hold its own local banking licenses. We're talking about an unverified network supposedly connecting global hubs, Munich, Dubai, Singapore, Manila. But to the outside world, this was a total black box. Literally no one outside the company could actually verify if a single transaction was truly happening through these mysterious partners.
Section 2. Faking 2 billion euros. Which brings us to the core mechanism of the fraud. Let's put our analytical hats on here and break down the sheer audacity of how Wirecard actually faked nearly 2 billion euros. Creating a digital illusion of astronomical revenue requires way more than just a lie. It requires a highly organized system of fabricated proof. The entire scam rested on escrow accounts. If you don't know, that's essentially a secure holding pen for money managed by a trusted third party. Wirecard falsely claimed that their massive profits from all those third-party acquirers were being held safely in huge escrow accounts at two major, highly respected banks over in the Philippines. It sounded legitimate, it sounded structured, and most importantly, it sounded safe.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is just how breathtakingly simple the circular flow of this fake money actually was. Step 1, claim a massive offshore profit from those black box partners. Step 2, when the auditors ask to see the money, just completely forge the bank statements from the Philippines. Step 3, produce totally fake letters to satisfy the auditors' checklists. And finally, Step 4, sit back and watch the stock price artificially skyrocket. The reality? Those Philippine banks didn't even have those accounts. Those third-party partners were often just shell companies controlled by Wirecard insiders moving money in a giant circle to create this massive digital illusion of revenue.
Section 3. Exposing the master illusion.
Of course, an illusion of this magnitude just can't exist forever without someone noticing the strings, right? For years, skeptics, short sellers, and journalists tried to sound the alarm. They warned that the numbers just didn't add up. And whenever someone questioned their books, Wirecard didn't exactly try to transparently explain themselves. No, they went on the attack.
They deployed vicious private investigators and incredibly aggressive legal teams to silence any critics. And this brilliantly illustrates the most profoundly frustrating part of the whole saga. On one side, you had relentless investigative journalists, led by Dan McCrum at the Financial Times, tirelessly tracking offshore shell companies and exposing massive inconsistencies. On the other side, you had the German regulators. And what did the regulators do? Instead of investigating the blatantly obvious red flags at Wirecard, they actually turned their fire on the reporters, launching criminal investigations into the journalists for market manipulation.
And that brings us to this incredibly chilling quote. The watchdog had been captured. The very institutions designed to protect the market and uncover fraud were essentially weaponized by the fraudsters to protect the illusion. It's wild. It was a staggering systemic failure that allowed Wirecard to hide the truth in plain sight for years, completely frustrating the people who were desperately trying to sound the alarm.
Section 4. The sudden unraveling. Let's move along and see how this builds, because reality always catches up, leading to one of the most insanely rapid collapses in modern corporate history. After years of deception and fighting off critics, the foundation finally cracked. In June 2020, their longtime auditors, EY, finally drew a line. They flat out refused to sign off on the accounts because they just couldn't find the missing 1.9 billion euros. Just days later, the board is forced to publicly admit the money likely did not exist. Next thing you know, CEO Marcus Brown resigns and is immediately arrested. And within mere hours of that arrest, Wirecard files for bankruptcy. An entire multi-billion euro valuation literally evaporated into total insolvency in just a matter of days.
The fallout for these executives was truly cinematic. In December 2024, Marcus Braun was sentenced by a Munich court to 8 years in prison for his role. But look at his second-in-command, the COO, Jan Marsalek. Marsalek vanished onto a private jet to Belarus right before the collapse. Today, he remains one of the world's most wanted fugitives. And, incredibly, investigators have revealed he wasn't just a corporate fraudster. He was actually deeply entangled in a massive web of international espionage. I mean, it literally reads like a spy thriller, but it is entirely real.
Section 5. The cost of blind trust. Okay, let's slow down for a second here, because beyond the spy thrillers and the billions in missing euros, there is a very devastating, real-world human cost to this deception. This wasn't just numbers moving around on a screen. So the crucial point is understanding exactly who was left holding the bag. The victims were innocent people who genuinely believed the establishment hype. We're talking about pension funds that thought they were holding a completely stable tech giant. Everyday retail investors who poured their life savings into what they were told was a sure thing. Thousands of innocent employees who quite literally watched their careers disintegrate overnight. Ultimately, the greatest cost was this profound, lingering loss of faith in the fundamental integrity of the market itself.
Wirecard represents a massive, catastrophic failure of that growth-at-all-costs culture. The core lesson we absolutely have to take away from this explainer is that complexity is often just a deliberate mask for deception. When a company's business model is so opaque and convoluted that literally no one can clearly explain how it actually makes its money, you aren't looking at an innovation, you're looking at a trap. True transparency isn't just some annoying regulatory checklist, it is the absolute non-negotiable bedrock of a functioning economy.
The digital ghosts of Wirecard have finally been laid to rest, but their shadow, that's permanent. It leaves us with this final, really vital question to consider regarding our markets today. In the pursuit of wealth, what lies are we choosing to believe simply because we're too afraid to look behind the curtain? Think about that as you look at the investments and institutions around you. If you found this explainer helpful and you're ready to see past the hype and into the real truth of the financial world, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our next deep dive. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one.